Welcome to Reach Church. I'm Marshall Fant, the Director of Church Consulting and Strategic Planning for Gospel Fellowship Association Missions. My purpose is to encourage pastors and church leaders as you refocus, renew, and revitalize your churches. We've established this podcast to offer practical tips and suggestions as you equip disciples to make disciples. It's Marshall Fant. Welcome back to GFA Missions Reach Church. So glad to have you with us today, either by podcast or on YouTube. So very thankful for the ministry. I always want to thank GFA and the home office here for sponsoring this podcast. And today is going to be, I really think, a valuable tool for parents, pastors, teens, with our guest, as well as the discussion we will have. And so, Matt Collier, welcome back to Reach Church.
Thank you.
Yeah,
good to be here.
Yeah, the last time we did a podcast with Matt and Kelly, and we sat around a little bit of recorder up in your church, and before we did Zoom and everything else. So it's a little different than back in.
I think it was pretty rough on the audio there, but that's okay.
But we had a great time.
A long way.
Yeah, and that was back. I wanted you and Kelly as one of the first podcasts, and I should have had you on back now. So. Matt, fill everybody in on, so you've transitioned since then from the pastorate. Tell everybody your position now.
So I'm still functioning as a director of Camps Abroad, which is a missions arm of the Wilds Christian camp, but also serving as the president of the corporation. So that's been about 2 years now. Yeah,
so we really enjoy that. So thank you for taking that challenge. And, of course, under the Wilds corporate, you have the Wilds in North Carolina. The Wilds, New England, Camps Abroad, right? So all that's correct. Falls under your responsibility. And you got a great staff and great people working with you. And
we absolutely do. No way to do that without all that help. So
and I think
you're involved as well, part of the Wilds board, and we have a lot of great supporters outside the ministry as well. So.
Yeah, and I think our listeners identify with the Wilds and their philosophy, and so I think it's important as we get into this. So the topic of today is an article. Really, I guess it's a positional paper, a white paper. What would you call this, Matt?
Yeah, we call it a white paper. A little broader than a position paper. It's more just informative, trying to get some discussion started and try to get some information to the right people. Hopefully, be a help to a lot of folks. It's our prayer.
Yeah, and one of the verses I think about is in Titus 2:12. It says, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we shall live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present age. And so the topic of the paper is called Created to Connect. And Matt, when I read it, I immediately thought of parents. I thought of teens. I thought of pastors, teachers. Really, so this is not just for parents of teens, because I think it's aimed at that, because I know y'all serve thousands of teens every year through the Wilds. I think it's just a great paper identifying a trend in our culture. So I want to thank you for writing it.
Oh, absolutely. You actually picked up on it. Our main target audience for this one was youth pastors and pastors. Secondary would be the parents of teenagers, because we're all in the trenches together on this. Yeah.
And really, but it's a reflection of our culture. And as we walk through this, so really, for our listeners' sake and viewers' sake, what I'm going to do is just interview Matt about the article. And at the end, I want you to be sure and tell listeners where to find it. Because if you look at, I just thought you introduced this well. You talked about gaming, social media, texting. And I think everyone of all ages would immediately say, yes, we're on this cell phone, this device all the time. So wherever we go, people are looking into the cell phone instead of who's around them. So again, to repeat and to introduce, so the article, the paper is called Created to Connect, Helping Teens Develop Deeper Relationships. Okay, so Matt, what stirred, tell us just in the beginning, so what stirred your interest? What piqued your interest to research this and write this?
Yeah, for us personally, my oldest son is a teenager. He's actually 18. He's a senior now. So we had walked through a lot of this with him. We'd seen some of the same tendencies with him on a personal level. But also, Kelly and I, the last 2 summers, have really taken time to try to interview youth pastors and pastors who've come through the wilds for summer mainly. And as we talk to them, we're just asking general questions. Hey, what are you facing in your churches? What are your young people struggling with? And the wilds has a special place in our hearts for teens, and that's
Right.
always been our main focus. So just trying to find out, so what is going on and what are the current issues and how can we come alongside and help? So I would say, as we were talking to them, asking these questions, certain issues kept rising to the surface, and this was one of them. Youth pastors especially are just saying, we are having a really hard time connecting with our teens in a face-to-face way because there's so many barriers, so many obstacles to that. And they were very concerned about the fallout of it. So we heard from a lot of different pastors. That's probably the primary motivation for this.
All right. So the two questions you bring up in your paper, number one would be, how do we know that teens are struggling to develop genuinely deep relationships? And one of that was interviewing those that work with them. What other evidence or however? I mean, we know it's a problem. I'm just asking. It's a question you bring up in the paper. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, that it definitely is the experience of it. I think most adults can relate to. There's something going on here, and maybe we can't put terminology to it. Maybe we can't put our finger on exactly what it is, but it's pretty self-evident that teens today are having more difficulties. They have more obstacles than we used to, even a generation ago. You can call name the generation whatever you want. It's more and more. This generation of digital natives have never known life without a cell phone, and that's a huge part of it.
Wait, what did you call them? It's
definitely been formative.
What kind of natives did you? What was that term?
Digital natives is the terminology out there. In fact, there are a lot of studies coming out. I cited a few of them in the article, but many of these are coming out because of the after effects of the pandemic. So they did these studies during the pandemic, even after the pandemic, and coming out of it, it's like the isolation just put it on steroids. It was a catapult,
right,
to bring these issues to bear. So a lot of these studies are just now coming out with the results of it, and I think it's a greater awareness of this even in secular society. So there is a lot of conversation going on. We wanted to jump in from a biblical perspective.
All right, and so let's jump right into what you just said. So I think one of your articles, in the article you make it very clear, is you say the statement you make, because you wrote the article, is God created people to be relational. And you go on to say, because of his triune nature, God is inherently relational. All people need relationships in order to fulfill their God-designed purpose. This created purpose explains why human beings are driven to form relationships, whether healthy or unhealthy. All right, so
absolutely.
Unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, I think we all, as we've grown up in Christianity around the Bible, I mean, we know this innately. God created us for that relational purpose. And there are a number of good books that have been written on that, the theology of the Trinity and just how that affects who we are. And so it's something innate that I think a lot of these studies that are coming out, whether it's from the Benison Strategy Group, that was a recent study that just came out, they're getting to the symptoms, but they don't have a way to identify the root problem. And that's where, as Christians, we're coming at it from a different perspective, that this is really at the core of who we are because of how God created us. And I think even unbelievers see that. Like, right. They still have this longing for deeper interaction, deeper connections. Christians especially, though, can have the answer to that, but it doesn't mean we do have the answer to that. We have to intentionally trace it back to what we are. And that's where I think teens need guidance in that. Mm-hmm. They need guidance from helpful adults who care about them, love them, and are willing to actually show them something different. And deep down, they have this longing but they may not be able to put it into words and really express truly what it means and what they need.
So I think what you're saying, so the grid we need to look through is the fact that God has created us to be relational. All right. So
Yes.
as we have these distractions consistently before us, it does create certain problems. And I think, again, thanks for writing the paper. I think your paper does a great job of really outlining what some of this looks like. Okay. And then you give some solutions. So let me just go with this. So on one of your phrases is you say this, that this digital natives, they have an illusion of closeness because of all this, social media, gaming, whatever, texting. There's an illusion of closeness. All right.
Yeah,
so explain that phrase.
You could almost call it a pseudo closeness. It's something that they feel close, and yet when you dig down further, you find out there's nothing to it.
Okay.
And I wouldn't even say this is just for teens. I think they're finding this with social media across the board, that it leads to dissatisfaction. The studies coming out, especially across, not for adults as well, that when we spend a lot of time with social media, it creates discontentment. It creates unhappiness even. I think there's a deeper explanation of that. And it goes back to the limitations of social media, because the screens actually, they do provide a connection, but it actually, in a roundabout way, unintentionally, I think, promotes artificiality. It does not lend itself to authenticity. You can present a carefully crafted kind of an aura. You present what you want to be seen. And that's really, it gets beyond the symptoms a little bit, because the teens are wanting more. They're longing for more. And you have this idea that a lot of, I'm sure people have, you pinned the terminology down. I can't remember who, I did trace out who coined the term, but the fear of missing out. They see all of this going on and they want it. They're longing for something more. Well, what they're missing out on is not just the experiences other people are having. What they're missing out on is that deeper interpersonal relationship that they're longing for. And that's why teens today are struggling more with depression, with suicide than ever before. And it seems to be directly connected to the rise of social media use through their smartphones. And that's typically how they access it. So all of these things are kind of trending up together. And it really leads us to, here's a deeper problem going on.
All right, you have a quote in here. You say that know thyself has been replaced by love thyself. And is that part of everything you just described, or is that separate?
I would say it's a little separate.
Okay.
Another offshoot of what has developed is the self-centeredness of, it's about me, everything centers on me. And so I think the way that we approach social media can really enhance that perspective as well. But in a roundabout way, that is relational as well, because you can't really have meaningful connections with people unless you're willing to sacrifice for them. So we have Christ as our pattern in that. So the self-centeredness of it is going to really, I think, hamper their relational development as well. But I would say that's kind of a separate issue than what we're talking about with the artificiality of these screens. Because basically, when you're on one side, it's kind of ironic we're talking through a screen.
I know.
I can present whatever image I want to present,
right? And
yet you wouldn't know anything different,
right?
And it becomes that barrier to authenticity.
All right, so let me go back. I may have because I didn't. I want to go back to a point you said, because it is reading your article, fear of missing out. I kind of let you kind of cruise right through that. So can we go back there and camp just a minute?
Sure.
So define fear of missing out, what it is driving teens to do. Is it driving them to spend more time on social media? Is it driving them to appear somebody they're not? Yes and yes. If you just could go back there just a minute.
So it's a concerning cycle. So we typically only post the highlights on social media, and that's across the board. We're going to post things that we think are people want to see or are meaningful. And in the process, we're presenting this image that this is the main thing that's happening in my life, even though it's just the highlights. So the teen is looking at his friends and seeing all the things they're doing and getting this sense of, wow, I'm just left out. That's not my life. I don't have that going on, and I'm not connected with these people. And there's this party going on over here, and I wasn't invited. And it just really enhances the feeling that there's something I'm missing out on. And yet, I think that fear of missing out points to something deeper, because there's more to relationships than just scrolling and liking.
Yeah.
Social media in general, and again, I'm not anti-social media. I think it has a place and a good function. But for teens, especially, who don't have the maturity to handle this in a spiritual way, it can really lead to some serious image issues in their minds of who they are, and even identity crisis. And they are maybe interacting on a surface level. They're not getting deep with anybody that they're friends with, because the media is not set up for that.
So does this drive them to, I'm just thinking of two things. Does this drive them to more social media? Does this drive them to present a different image of themselves? Or again,
ironically, both. Typically, it does throw them more into social media because they're looking for something.
Mm-hmm.
So they keep looking in that place. In the process, though, it actually creates more dissatisfaction, more discontentment. In fact, some of the recent surveys that are out, teens are spending much less time with their friends personally,
right,
more and more time online through social media. So yeah, there's that discontentment. And then it causes them to try to, well, I don't want people to think that I'm not doing these things as well. So then it drives them to do more posting. It's this vicious cycle that has really not a good outcome for the teens, especially.
Now, you also mentioned in the article that, people would rather text than call.
Sure.
So they're still using this. So again, that is another, even though texting, I don't know if we call that social media, but so there's the texting versus calling. There's the FaceTiming versus being there in person. And there's the hours of gaming versus the reality of some kind of, gaming online versus relationships right? So when we say social media, I just want people to understand your article deals with more than simply Instagram. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. Teen guys tend to go more the gaming route, and they do it sometimes alone, but sometimes in a social setting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're connecting with their friends that way. But even then, it's through the barrier of the game itself. Right. Teen girls tend to go more direct with the interaction. But even then, it's a lot of viewing. It's a lot of downloading. I think TikTok is the number one after YouTube now for teen girls and what they're using. So they are then just absorbing more and more of what not just their friends are saying and doing and posting, but the influencers that they are following. And so that leads to some other issues as well. So even like take the influencers, the famous people that the teens follow, it creates a false sense of closeness with that person as well. And it leads to greater influence towards them.
All right. So we've kind of described the problem, but another thing I like about your article is then you give some, you start it by saying two things. There's a better way, and you give some specifics of ways that people can help.
Yeah.
All right. So
yeah, that is our heart.
All right.
In trying to guide all of us. We're all in the same boat. We all have teens that we love, whether they're grandkids or children of our own or friends at church. Yeah, that is the big question. How do we help in guiding them?
Yeah, and part of it, you say that, really people need to be authentic. I think that's a key word here versus I don't know, maybe artificial is not the right word. Maybe you have a better word for what it looks like on social media. But I think so. The better way is, you mentioned two words. I think you may be quoting either Tim Lane and Paul Tripp in their book, but you mentioned authenticity as well as vulnerability. So can you just pick that up, just discuss that a little bit?
So if you look at how Scripture presents healthy relationships, and especially in a church setting, there does have to be a knowing and being known that is going on. And I think there's been a lot of good books written on this that we just touched on as part of the solution. But that is by design. That's what God made us to be. And so if we don't have those two elements, then the relationships that we have are going to be shallow. And it's really hard to do that through a screen. Because again, you're thinking about the limitations of social media. They engender artificiality. So you have a teen that is presenting this carefully crafted image of himself or herself to the outside world, to their friends. And in turn, they're interacting with images that others are portraying as well. So it's really hard to have authenticity when all you're seeing is what you want other people to see. And you compound that, most of that interaction is flowing in one direction. So again, that's another barrier to authenticity. It's like that's not a conversation.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have conversations, but they're very limited. They're very stilted. They're short. How do you go deep in a setting like that? It's really hard. So I think that's the authenticity barrier. Then the vulnerability barrier, again, it's you're only presenting what you want people to see. If you have people who are actually getting into your life on a personal level, they're digging down, they're getting to know you, they're helping you see your own weaknesses, your own shortcomings. Well, we don't like that. Like, we're uncomfortable with that. But that is a recipe for a genuine face-to-face, deeper relationship. And that's what you just have a really hard time doing that online or over a screen.
Yeah. And I think the next thing I really like about your article, you got a question. So how can we help? And you've got some, ways, what you call of establishing a healthy communication line with them. So,
Absolutely.
And this has to be intentional. And it's got it should start in the home, but also, as you talk about connectivity, that also happens within the community of church.
Yes.
Of the one another's and everything being practiced there. You want to pick up with that and run with anything
there?
Yeah,
it's all integrated together. You'd say it starts in the home. It really comes back to the parents to model this kind of genuineness and authenticity. How do you, helping your teens form genuine relationships, how do you help them do that? Well, it starts with you reaching out to them and being a godly role model, because they really need to see people who are actively looking to engage them in deeper conversations. They're people, a lot of times, are intimidated by teens, and we all can be, because they have this aura of disinterestedness or apathy, or I just don't know their world and I don't know what they want to talk about. And yet it's easy to be put off by that, by their one-word answers or the hesitation to really communicate. But for a parent to push through that, and even other caring adults to push through that and say, I will not be denied. No, I really am going to get to know you as a person,
right? Because
I care about you and I want to know you and develop this relationship. That's the starting point. But we all know as well, it has to be that the main way the social development needs to be taking place is in the local church, and it's with other Christians, and not just other teens, but other adults who are actually willing to reach out and interact with teenagers as well. So I think we have a lot of hope, because we can guide them into a better understanding about relationships. We can teach them these truths that deep down they know and they've heard, and it resonates with them, and they are wanting more. We just have to get through that outside barrier that is very intimidating often.
Yeah, and again, you do a good job of pointing out teens need a trusted voice. and whether it's
Yeah.
coming from parents or youth pastors that have the same philosophy of life with the parents. But I think we as adults need to make sure we're taking that time to become a trusted voice and investing in time with them. Because we all know, and again, you do a good job pointing out, smartphones do have a place.
They do.
They do.
Absolutely.
But there's also the way God has created us. There is a part of the way God has created us that needs to be fulfilled by one-on-one or two or small group relationships, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
And it does, you nailed it. It does take time and it takes intentionality.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't happen accidentally, because if we just go with what's natural, we'll just be on our phones and let them be on their phones nonstop.
Yeah.
The end of the paper, we try to give some practical case studies of what that might look like. These are taken from various solutions, various input we've heard from pastors, from parents. This is what it could look like to really seek to break your teen out of that comfort zone of just being in their own world and that comfort of a screen. It's less awkward for them to relate that way, but there is a lot of benefit to pushing them outside of that comfort zone and seeing that develop. And you can see that through the church. You can see it in your community by stretching them with relationships and holding out. There's much more. There's a bigger purpose here, that God has called you. He's created you so that you can help other people spiritually. You can see that at camp. I mean, that's a great tool as well for a church, for parents to really stretch their young people, pull them out of their norm of having the cell phones where you don't even have it for several days. So there's a lot of hope, but it does take some intentional adult being involved in young people's lives.
All right, so I think what you mentioned, just let me say, I'm sure there are other camps, but I know at the Wilds and other camps have the same policy. When teens come, they check their cell phone with the sponsor, whoever brought them. So it really,
handle different ways. We don't even have a bring it because they know they'll have to turn it in. So often they'll leave it at home.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying, so that's a week of really almost detoxing from the electronic world and really communicating. So that's another great reason to at least, if for some reason you have not, for COVID or whatever reasons, you've not taken your child to a good Christian camp, and they're all over the country. We're not saying it's not just the Wilds, but with this philosophy to develop relationships, not only with other teens, but also like with youth pastors or counselors at the Wilds or the great camps, because there needs to be a trusted voice to help these kids navigate through this.
Absolutely. And sometimes I think we fear setting boundaries for teens because we're like, wow, they're almost adults, or this is a right they have to always be connected. You can set boundaries in smaller ways as well. You can do that at home, whether it's, I gave a few examples of what a number of parents do. They set times in the evening when this is a no cell phone time and you have to be engaged with the family, and it could be a couple hours or it could be all evening. You can do it at church where you set, well, hey, sorry, you can't have your phones during the Bible study or the youth activity or whatever. And you're just pushing them a little bit to get out of that norm and to get beyond those barriers to actually engage with people face to face.
Sure.
So it can be done, but yeah, camp is a good way to do that as well for a longer period of time.
Yeah, and another thing about your article, like you did not avoid some difficult topics. Like you did bring up the point of they need trusted voices to warn them, especially young men and even now young women, about pornography. It's at their fingertips, and this has damaging effects on all kind of relationships, not only in the present but in the future. So as you develop these relationships with teens, you have the opportunity to speak into their lives and give warnings, right? Yeah,
and I'm glad you brought up pornography, because I think pornography is another symptom of teens who are looking for something more, and they may start off as curiosity, but a lot of times, and it's even girls now, probably almost to an equal degree as guys, is what we're seeing, that they're searching for the relational element, but they're looking in the wrong place. And ultimately, that forms a warped view of God if they continue to expose themselves to that, because it's a twisted view of what God has given and those gifts. So yeah, there are a lot of things to overcome, but again, there's a lot of hope as we are really doing it God's way.
All right, so to kind of wrap it up, the premise or the foundational truth of the paper is God has created us for relationships. He's created us to connect. And so, Matt, I want to give you any closing thoughts, and then tell everyone where they can find this article online.
Sure. I would say there is a lot of hope for young people.
Right.
We're not pessimistic about them. They have so much to offer. They have so much potential. Now, they do have a lot to overcome as well, and yet we're seeing a desire for authenticity. We're seeing a desire for more, and that, I think, is something that we as caregivers or parents or youth pastors,
Sure.
we can help them with. We can guide them, and it appeals to that. Even some of them are setting their own limitations on social media because they see how it makes them feel. So we can really leverage that. And as they are guided into a deeper understanding of what is it that God wants from me, you hold out that purpose. God has something better for you.
Amen.
And really, that is a great motivation. So I think there's a lot of potential there. But yeah, as we seek to walk alongside of pastors, youth pastors, we're going to continue to seek for ways that we can really help them and equip them even more. So the website of the Wilds, wilds.org, is the best way to find this white paper, and it's on our homepage, a link directly to it. You just click on that Created to Connect link, and it'll take you to a hosted page for the white paper. So yeah, I hope it's a help. We love hearing from people of things that they're encountering, and always looking for ways to sharpen each other. So love to hear from anybody. Yeah.
Well, thanks for taking the time to research this and write it, because I've benefited from it. It's challenged me to even think about, okay, how am I falling prey of just staying with social media and not interacting with people. So Matt Collier, president of the Wilds, thank you so much. I appreciate the ministry you have, your wife Kelly, your entire family, and just thank you for what you do. So friends, visit thewilds.org or wilds.org and go to Created to Connect. Matt said it's on the homepage. So download that article or the paper, read it several times and digest what's in it, because God has created us to connect with one another. Matt, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You're listening to Rechurch, a podcast of Gospel Fellowship Association Missions. If you would like more information about our ministry or how we may assist you and your church, visit us at gfamissions.org/consulting.